Maybe it's because it's winter, maybe because there's a coolness in the air, or maybe it is because a kind of new Cold War is kicking off. The China expansionism is the thing I want to talk about a fair bit tonight, and there's very good reason for it. And whilst the Prime Minister in his comments today rightly didn't name the state activists that were involved in these cyber attacks on Australia, everybody else is pointing to only one, and that's China. China is attacking us on multiple fronts. And if you think for a moment there is just some coincidence in all of this, you're dead wrong. This is a coordinated attack on Australia's sovereignty. There is no other way of looking at it. The coronavirus in itself and the way in which it's destabilised our economy was one thing, but left-wing sponsorship of umpteen other causes in and around Australia over a number of years is certainly something else. Now, gravity, which I don't believe anybody's actually highlighted, is one of the speeches that were given this week. Our Tourism Minister, Simon Birmingham, made a comment that Australians have got to get used to the idea of not being able to travel overseas anytime soon. And at first blush, you think, well, that's fair enough. But the trouble is that in the Pacific, throughout the Pacific, there are very fragile economies that are very reliant on Australians travelling to them. You might think, well, it's fair enough we look after ourselves first and foremost. But in countries like Fiji, in countries like the Solomon Islands, Samoa, Tonga, the temptation of big cash splashes out of Beijing may well become the only way those nations are going to be able to survive economically as a result of the shutdown of the world travel market. Australia has a lead role to play in the Pacific, and we should be not turning our backs on these countries, particularly at this time. And while there's talk of a trans-Tasman air bubble, travel bubble, there was some weeks ago talk of including some of the Pacific Island nations. Now, I know from good sources in a place like Fiji, there's been no coronavirus outbreaks for almost 60 days. They have a cleaner slate than Australia or New Zealand when it comes to these matters, and rightly so, because of some of the ways in which some of the cultures live, very much so communally, multiple generations in very close quarters. So Fiji, for one, but it's not the only one, should not be damaged further economically by Australia failing to recognise that whilst we want to look after ourselves first and foremost, we have a responsibility, a leadership role to play in these vulnerable island states. Let me put it another way. The last thing we need are failed states in our backyard, in our front yard, out through the side window. The last thing we need are Chinese outposts to the east of us. And it is a serious issue that is worthy of real discussion. But equally, this white-handing of us, of the culture that landed Australia where it is right now, of the traditions, the statues that represented some of the people, the institutions that have been at the mainstay of the stability of this nation, the sixth oldest continuous democracy in the world. The sixth oldest continuous democracy in the world. New Zealand is seventh oldest. The way in which these institutions have been damaged, have been taunted, have been torn apart, have been ridiculed and challenged. Not afraid of the debate, but the violence that has come into some of these street protests and the consequences of this crowd of cancel culture people is really quite serious. What do we stand for? Because if we don't stand for anything, we'll fall for everything. And if you think there's nothing to do with China, go back 50 years ago, because this is exactly what Mao Zedong did to the old Chinese culture. This is what he did, and Madame Mao, what they did through the 50s and 60s, where they destroyed Chinese culture and history, tore down the statues, threw away the ornaments and artefacts. And if it hadn't been for those who were well-heeled and capable of smuggling a lot of those artefacts out into Taiwan, across the Taiwan Straits into the free China, a lot of that stuff would be lost. So this pattern of behaviour, this disrupting the way society operates, this unnerving of an entire generation of Australians about turning their back on tradition is by any means a deliberate plan. And we need to be very much so on guard for it. Keen to know what you think. #Hardgrave at skynews.com.au.